single volume to date has yet collected all 6,000 years of Arcanum's recorded history. Indeed, many would argue that it is impossible to approach such a gargantuan subject within the covers of a single book. When I was a younger man, it was my burning ambition to write the definitive history of all Arcanum, but I never imagined for a moment that it was possible to do so in a simple or concise manner. That is very true. Even if you knew of history, you cannot write out of history. That would be so difficult. Instead, I labored for many decades, traveling from place to place in my researches, and produced no fewer than 23 detailed volumes, which I dare to call the complete histories. Alas, the fury arrogance of youth. Very true. I now believe that compiling the entire history of Arcanum in any great detail is a task well beyond the reach of any one man. And what is more, it is a task which will become more difficult with every passing year. In my travels, I have had occasion to sift through many of the world's great libraries and scriptoriums, searching always for the most ancient books, scrolls, and tablets which were still legible. Arcanum's history revealed itself to me slowly, showing first one face and then another as I spent weeks, months, and even years in transcription and translation. But for every precious source document which had been recorded on a sturdy clay tablet, a sheaf of hammered gold, or a roll of soft vellum, there were 100 papyri which were as dry and fragile as old leaves, and 100 more which had half crumbled into illegible fragments. The millennia of knowledge contained therein were in imminent danger of being lost forever, and in some cases they were lost before I ever arrived. So is the difficulty of history in general. Sometimes the only fragments left are those that will never tell you the original story ever. No matter how hard you try, you just never figure it out. Maybe even there is the case where the fragments are misleading and mean something completely different. There are so many wrong assumptions made in modern history. Both the Elvish and Dwarven races are possessed of rich oral histories, which chronicle events even more remote and arcane than those recorded by the scribes. But these oral traditions are hard to come by for those outside the appropriate race and culture, and I've rarely been privy to them. Perhaps that is best, as the time between fact and myth grows less clear the further one looks behind, and the transcription of oral histories is more properly the work of a folklorist than a historian. Whenever possible, I have always attempted to keep my own chronicles well grounded in fact, erring on the side of discretion rather than speculation of an untoward credulity. Over the years, I've found that it's rather easier to believe a well-told and dramatic story than it is to prove that story true. Indeed, lately, a number of new scientific theories have been put forward as to the history of Arcanum's civilized peoples. Contrary to what one may assume after reading the arguments of Mr. John Beddoes, it was in fact the elves and the dwarves who first reached what we might consider civility. Thousands of years ago, it is from these elder races that the first true historical traditions can be traced. Gnomish culture appears to be quite a bit younger than either of those, although the lack of recorded historical documents made available to human researchers might be attributed to the secretive nature of their society. Human development, by contrast, appears to have been much slower. Only in the last 2000 years have humans produced any significant cultural art and literature. Of course, there are exceptions to those general rules, but prior to a few thousand years ago, most of humanity seems to have consisted of little more than illiterate nomadic tribes, barbarian hordes, and cave-dwelling hunter-gatherers. One cannot speak about the recent history of Arcanum without addressing the growing dichotomy between magic and what has come to be known as technology. My research has shown to me a direct correlation between the widespread use of those two forces and increased levels of societal development. Are not the elves the true discoverers of magic, or, as Bedouin has suggested, the eldest children of the magical age? Were the dwarves not the fathers of technological tradition, centuries before the advent of Mr. Bates and his steam engines? Humans, it seems, have now inherited the scientific legacy of the dwarves, and does it not appear that we are now poised for what might be called a golden age of cultural expansion and hegemony? The simple volume, in painting a clear picture of the past, might also shed some light on what we can expect in the years to come. A wise man once said that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. To this, I will add that today's future is simply tomorrow's history waiting to be born. I also believe that if we are to have any clear notion of where we are going, we must know from whence we have come and what has gone before us. It is to this end that I have condensed all I know of Arcanum in a single volume, which I hope will find favor with readers from all walks of life. Dr. Julius Mr. Crenshaw, Department of History, Tarrant University. Chapter 1, Introduction. The following is excerpted from the Principia Technologica, reprinted here with permission of the publisher, Tarrant University Press, and the author, 1876, all rights reserved. Principia Technologica, being collected the lectures of Sir Harris Gaffingford, a helpful illustration of the principles of science. Chapter the 4th, on the eternal conflict between natural and supernatural forces. Up to this point, our experiments have served only to illustrate the principles of natural law. The purpose of the exercises in this chapter, however, is to demonstrate the fundamental conflict between natural law and its nemesis, supernatural law. Natural law being represented by a variety of simple technological devices, while supernatural law is embodied by an equally simple magical device. Like all our experiments, these exercises were chosen for their lucid design and straightforward execution. They should prove suitable for students of all ages. Laboratory number 1. The inclined plane. As you may recall, we have demonstrated the inclined plane and explained its uses in the previous lesson. This is a simple machine, the purpose of which is to reduce the difficulty of moving objects from place to place. Even the simplest country farmer understands the use of this device. It is always easier to push a heavy load down a ramp than it is to push the same load across even ground. There are two principles of natural law at work, but the one that concerns us most in this experiment is known as the coefficient of friction. Here we place an object upon the inclined plane. For purpose of this experiment, we have chosen a simple block of stone. Note that when the inclined plane C is placed at a sharp angle, block A will automatically begin to slide down the ramp. If the ramp is steep, he does not need to push the cart at all. It will roll down in its own accord. On the other hand, block A will not slide of its own accord if our inclined plane is given a lesser angle. There is some innate resistance to its motion down the plane. This resistance to motion is what we call the coefficient of friction. To lower this coefficient, the smaller the angle of the plane must be in order to make the block slide. Basically, he's talking about basic physics here. Begin the experiment with your inclined plane at its most acute angle, nearly flat upon the table. Take block A and place it on the inclined plane C. Note that the block does not slide. Having observed this high coefficient of friction, tilt inclined plane C slowly, a few degrees at a time, until that friction is overcome and your block does begin to slide. Having now found the precise angle necessary for the block to slide of its own accord, lower the angle of the plane by a degree or two. You have now established a precarious balance in which the coefficient of friction is only just high enough to overcome the angle of the plane. The aforementioned coefficient is almost, but not quite, low enough to allow block A to slide. Introduce a magical artifact into the system. Slowly bring it to the vicinity of inclined plane C. Notice that block A begins to slide haltingly downward. The angle of the plane has not changed, nor has the nature of the block, but the magical artifact slightly alters the coefficient of friction in its immediate proximity. The alteration is unstable and unpredictable, causing the block to slide in a variable manner. It is the same unpredictability and instability in all magical effects, which makes compensation for these effects on a machine impossible. Even a small change in the coefficient of friction can and will cause gears to grind, belts to break, and cogs to crash and stick, with disastrous consequences. I see, he's basically explaining that the magic source here is too unstable. So when we present magic with a mechanical device, the mechanical device starts to break down. Laboratory number 2, the swinging pendulum. The principle of the pendulum was discovered by early technologists. As you may recall, it was early established by that the period for the back and forth oscillation of any pendulum of any given length is always the same, no matter how large its arc or how heavy its bob may be. For this reason, pendulums make excellent timekeeping devices, as they are less dependent on temperature variations than spring-based clocks. Let us start our second experiment then with 3 pendulums. Begin by setting our 3 pendulums a swing. While they are swinging, measure their periods with a pocket watch or water clock. Our first water clock. Oh, that's interesting. Our first superficial observation is that the pendulums with longer rods swing more slowly than those with shorter rods. In fact, the period of any pendulum is mathematically exact, and it can be expressed as a mathematical formula. To find the period, we have only to extract the square root of the rod's length. Now introduce the magical artifact, while the pendulum are still swinging. Note how the swinging becomes erratic. Some pendulums swing more slowly, while others swing faster than we would predict by use of our previously reliable mathematical formula. The variance in the new periods of these pendulums is no longer proportional for the length, mass of arc, of the rod. The only factor is the proximity of the offending artifact, and even this is not reliable enough to be predicted. As in our first experiment, The variance is wild. The consequences for any machine which depends upon regular oscillations for its function are immediate and catastrophic. In the presence of supernatural force, clocks will go awry, engines throw their rods, and metronomes dance our tarantella. It is an unavoidable side effect of disrupting the natural laws associated with oscillation. Laboratory number 3, the electric circuit. In our final demonstration, we will use the self-same electric circuit which we built in the last week's session. If you will recall, this is a machine of very simple design. A small battery serves as our source of electromotive force, driving its current across a resistance. Here, that resistance is evinced by a small filamentary bulb. For the purpose of this experiment, the wires used to form the circuit can be assumed to be of negligible resistance. Recall now that the circuit is closed using switch B. A potential difference is created between the battery and the bulb. According to natural law, electricity flows from highest potential to lowest, following along the path of least resistance. And that path, in this case, is the wire. As a result, the filament within the bulb glows, because electricity is passing through it. However, when the circuit is opened again, no path is available for the electricity to follow, and the bulb goes dark. Close the circuit to light the bulb again. Observe how the filament glows bright and steady. No insulative substance has yet been discovered to shield the machine from this effect. Now introduce a magical artifact into close proximity. Take notice that the bulb immediately begins to flicker. The artifact appears to sporadically disrupt the electric potentialities inherent in the circuit, and the electricity, which would normally flow from highest potential to lowest in a predictable fashion, now flows back and forth along the wires in half-hour's confusion. No insulative substance has yet been discovered to shield the machine from this effect. Accordingly, the presence of supernatural force continues to wreak havoc on any machine which requires a steady flow of electricity for proper functioning. Please take special note, because our electrical circuit is a very small machine and our battery is not possessed of any great power, we are not in any particular danger as we perform this experiment. The same cannot be said of exposing larger and more complex machines, which marshal far more powerful energies, to the disruptive influence of supernatural forces. The result of disrupting electrical potentials within a machine which harbors a great deal of electromotive force can not only be inconvenient and nettlesome, but downright explosive. Technologists have been known to lose their lives to engines and generators gone mad. The utmost caution is urgently advised. This is a very long manual. There are like 180 pages of manual in here. But most of it is just about explaining the game. Wow, they wrote so much. Just look at this. There is so much here. There are 180 pages. 180 damn pages. There's a few more interesting. A little bit of history here.